The foreclosure notice had been taped to the front door of Cole's motor and cycle for 11 days before Everett finally stopped tearing them down. He'd gotten good at ignoring things that hurt. He'd had to. The last 4 years had been nothing but practice. Practicing how to watch someone disappear one hospital room at a time. Practicing how to smile at creditors on the phone while standing in a garage that was slowly being eaten alive by debt. Practicing how to eat soup for dinner and tell himself it tasted fine. Practicing how to wake up on the right side of a bed that felt wrong, no matter which side he woke up on, and get dressed anyway, and come here anyway, and open the doors anyway, because the work didn't stop just because everything else had. I was 52 years old, and somewhere along the way, between the grief and the bills and the quiet desert nights that just kept coming one after another without asking permission, Everett Cole had gotten very, very good at pretending things weren't as bad as they were. But tonight he couldn't pretend anymore. Tonight was the last night. The bank had been clear. Monday morning, 8 o'clock sharp, Gerald Whitmore's assessment crew was showing up to begin the transition process. Whitmore 45 tan soft in the middle, with the professional pleasantness of a man who had never personally experienced the consequences of his own decisions, had been circling Cole's motor and cycle for the better part of 18 months. Patient, methodical, the way certain predators are patient. Not cruel exactly, just completely indifferent to what stood in the way of what he wanted. The warehouse project was approved. The zoning was cleared. The money had changed hands somewhere in an office Everett would never be invited into. And that was that. 53 years of his family's history reduced to a line item in somebody else's development portfolio. Everett stood in the middle of the main bay and just looked at it all for a long moment. The fluorescent light in the back corner had been flickering since 1987. His father had always meant to fix it. Never did. Everett had never fixed it either. He told himself 100 times he'd get around to it, and then something else had needed doing, and the seasons had stacked up, and now here he was on the last night of everything, watching that same light blink, its patient, stubborn rhythm in the corner, and there was something about that, about a light that had been quietly broken for almost 40 years and had still managed to keep on going, that hit him somewhere he wasn't ready for. He turned away from it and picked up an empty cardboard box. He started with the small things. The framed photograph of his father, Harlan Cole, standing in front of the garage the day it opened. July 14th, 1971. Harlan was 26 years old in that picture, grinning like the hard years had never happened. One hand on the door frame, the other holding a wrench, like it was a trophy he'd earned in a war nobody gave medals for. He'd built this building himself, poured the foundation, framed the walls, run the electrical working through a hand injury he'd never had properly treated because there hadn't been money for doctors, only money for lumber and pipe fittings, and the dream that was either going to work or wasn't. It had worked. For 53 years it had worked. Everett wrapped the photograph carefully in an old shop rag and set it in the bottom of the box. Then the coffee mug. Sylvia had given it to him the Christmas before her first diagnosis. It said "World's Okayest Mechanic" in chip block letters, and she'd laughed so hard when he opened it that she'd spilled her eggnog, and he'd pretended to be offended, and she'd said she'd meant it as a compliment, which made no logical sense, which made both of them laugh even harder. He hadn't used that mug in 2 years. He'd been afraid to. Like if he used it too much, he'd wear her out of it somehow. Like the ceramic held something of her that couldn't be replaced once it was gone. He wrapped it too slowly in a clean piece of cloth he'd been keeping in the top drawer for no particular reason, except that it was clean and soft, and some things deserve to be wrapped in something clean and soft. Then he stopped. He stood in the middle of the garage with a half-packed box at his feet and his hands hanging at his sides, and for a long minute he just breathed, in and out. The desert night pressing against the walls. The highway out front, that long empty stretch of Route 66 that didn't carry the traffic it used to, offering only the occasional sound of a semi pushing through towards somewhere else, toward California or Nevada, or anywhere that wasn't here, anywhere that was still moving forward. His father had picked this location on purpose. People stop when they're tired or broken, Harlan used to say. You want to be where people stop. Everett had always thought that was just his father being poetic. He understood now it was just the truth. Simple and practical and true, the way all of his father's best observations had been simple and practical and true. He pulled the folding chair to the center of the bay, sat down and opened a can of beer he'd been keeping in the mini fridge since last Thanksgiving. He'd been saving it for a special occasion. Losing everything felt close enough. He sat in the quiet and looked at the place he'd spent his life. The South Bend lathe in the back corner, 1968, bought used by Harlan in 1973, still running as smooth as the day it was made. His father had taught him to use it when he was 11 years old, standing behind him with his good hand guiding Everett's through the first cut, his voice patient and low. You feel that that's the metal talking. You listen to the metal, and the metal tells you what it needs. The Bridgeport Mill from 1971, original to the garage that had shaped more metal in the last 50 years than Everett could calculate. The parts cabinet, a system of hand-labeled drawers that Harlan had organized alphabetically, that Harlan's wife had reorganized by size, that Everett had given up reorganizing years ago because it had developed its own internal logic over decades that only made sense to someone who'd grown up inside it. The workbench Harlan had built from Douglas fir in 1972, still solid, still exactly level. Everett had checked it with a precision level 3 years ago just to know, and it had been dead flat, which was either exceptional craftsmanship or exceptional luck, or most likely both, because that was who Harlan Cole had been. The tool wall, every hook and shadow board exactly as it had always been, tools hanging in their designated places the way they'd hung since before Everett was old enough to reach them. 43 years of Everett's working life layered over 30 of his father's. All of it contained in this building that would be something else entirely by the end of next week. All of it about to become nothing more than a memory in a man's head, and when the man was gone, not even that. He took a long drink of the beer and set it on the floor beside the chair. He thought about Sylvia. I did that most evenings now, but tonight it was different. Tonight he wasn't remembering her the way he usually did, in fragments and small daily moments that caught him off guard. The way she used to leave her reading glasses on top of the coffee maker, never on the nightstand where they belonged, always on the coffee maker, so reliably that he'd stopped being annoyed by it and started finding it endearing. And then she was gone, and the coffee maker sat there with no reading glasses on top of it, and he'd have given anything to have them back. The particular sound of her laugh when something genuinely surprised her, the way she'd fall asleep in the passenger seat within 10 minutes of any drive longer than 30 miles without fail, like clockwork, her head tipping slowly toward the window and her breathing going soft. Tonight he was thinking about her in the garage together, about the cookout in the summer of 1998, the customer appreciation event his father had organized every year in the parking lot, free hot dogs and soda in a boombox playing country music someone had borrowed from the parts counter. Sylvia had come with her friend whose car Harlan had been servicing, and she'd laughed at something Everett said before he'd even known she was someone he should try to make laugh. About the morning 23 years later when he'd sat in the office in his father's chair and told her the bank was calling about the first missed payment, and she'd taken his hand across the desk without saying anything, without offering reassurances she couldn't guarantee, because she'd known even then that the words would come later, and what he needed first was just for her to be there. She'd always known what he needed before he did. He missed that more than almost anything. He finished the beer, set the empty can on the workbench, stood up and started walking the perimeter of the main bay one more time, running his hand along the edges of things, the way you touch something you love when you're preparing to let it go. The radio on the shelf near the door, the same AM radio that had been in the garage since 1974 that received exactly 3 stations clearly and 2 others depending on the weather and the position of the antenna, and some mysterious third factor that Everett had never been able to identify. The stack of service manuals organized by make and model, going back to the early 70s, some of them so worn that the covers had separated from the spines and had been taped back on and then taped again. The small shelf of trophies from the regional classic car show, Three first places in 2 seconds, all of them earned by Everett's work on customer vehicles that the customers had then shown themselves. I didn't own any of the cars he'd made beautiful. He'd only ever owned the work. He was standing at the far end of the bay, looking back toward the front, when the memory of that morning's visit came back to him uninvited. 7 o'clock. Whitmore had come by personally, which Everett had come to understand was a particular kind of power move, showing up at the place you were about to take, while the person who owned it still lived in it, while they were still eating breakfast and making coffee, and going about the ordinary business of a life you'd already decided to end. He'd been pleasant. He was always pleasant. He had the easy confidence of a man who'd been told yes by everything that mattered for so long that the concept of no had become theoretical to him. He'd stood in this bay with his chain store coffee and his expensive suit, and he'd looked around with the expression of a man who sees only what something will become, never what it is. And then he'd said in the tone of someone delivering practical wisdom to someone who wasn't quite sophisticated enough to have arrived at it themselves, I know this is hard. I know what this place means to you, but sometimes the right thing is to let go. Everett had looked at him. He'd thought about saying, my father built this building with a hand that hadn't healed right from an injury nobody had bothered to properly document. He thought about saying, I changed my first oil filter in this bay when I was 9 years old, and my father stood right there and told me to do it again because the first time is practice and the second time is the job. He thought about saying, my wife and I built a life together that had this garage at the center of it, and she's gone now, and this is the last thing I have that still has both of us in it. He'd said none of it, because Whitmore was looking at him with the specific patience of a man who had somewhere to be and had already calculated that whatever Everett said next would not change the outcome, and was prepared to be respectfully attentive until Everett finished, and then continue with the plan regardless. So Everett had said nothing, and Whitmore had left. And now it was nearly 11 o'clock on Sunday night, and the beer was gone, and the box was half packed, and the foreclosure notice on the inside of the door was the last one he hadn't torn down. I was about to go back to the office and try to get a few hours of sleep on the cot when he heard it. Not the sound of a healthy engine, not the rumble of something running right. This was a death sound. Metal grinding against metal in the specific way that told every mechanic's nervous system, before the conscious mind had time to process it, that something had already torn itself apart from the inside. A mechanical scream with a mechanical cough underneath it. The sound of a machine fighting a battle. It had already lost 100 miles ago and had only just now admitted. It was coming from the highway, getting louder and rougher with each second, and then there was a sharp crack, clean and final, like a gunshot in the desert silence, and the sound died. And then headlights swept across the garage windows as something rolled into the lot on momentum alone. Everett was on his feet before he'd made a conscious decision to move. He pushed through the side door into the cool night air and saw the motorcycle coasting to a stop in the gravel, trailing oil in a dark ribbon across the pavement. The rider hunched over the handlebars in the posture of a man who had been fighting his machine for a long time and had finally definitively exhaustedly lost. The bike stopped. The rider sat there for a moment, just sat with his hands still on the bars and his head down like a man saying a private word over something. Then he swung his leg over slowly the way men move when their body has been arguing with them all day and hasn't been winning, and stood up straight. I was maybe 65, maybe older. Gray beard, cut close jaw, set eyes that had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by any of it. He was wearing a leather vest over a black long-sleeve shirt, the vest closed up with a zipper, jeans gray with road dust from many hours of desert highway. He had the particular stillness about him that Everett associated with people who had spent real time around hard things. The kind of stillness that isn't coldness, but is something that grew from the same place, from having learned over many years that most panic is optional and most noise is wasted, and the only thing that actually helps is doing the next right thing. He looked at the motorcycle. Then he looked at Everett. She just gave out. His voice was low and unhurried, the voice of a man reporting a fact to someone he trusted to receive it without embellishment. About 6 miles back, she started knocking. I pushed her as long as she'd go. Everett crouched down next to the bike without being asked. He could already read the damage in the oil pooling fast and dark on the gravel, which meant a seal had failed badly. And from the sound he'd heard on the highway, the gunshot crack of metal letting go. All at once, he already had a working theory about what else had happened underneath. He reached under the engine casing and tested the residual heat without touching the metal directly. She's blown, Everett said. Not just the seal, I'd guess a connecting rod let go. Maybe both. The man didn't argue, didn't panic. He nodded once slowly like he'd suspected and had just been waiting for a professional to confirm what he'd already understood in his gut somewhere around Kingman. How long to fix her, he asked. Everett straightened up. Connecting rod job on a vintage Harley. He paused, doing the math that mechanics always do, the mental calculation of parts and time, and the specific complications that come with old iron. Assuming I have the stock, which I might not, 6 to 8 hours. Minimum. I need to be in Oakland by morning. Everett looked at him. That's 7 hours from here. I know. Just those two words. No drama in them, no performance of distress, no plea for special consideration. Just two words that carried the full weight of a situation that had no good options left. And the quiet dignity of a man who understood that clearly and wasn't going to pretend otherwise. The silence between them filled with the sound of oil dripping onto gravel. Slow and steady, the sound of something running out. How much, the man asked. And here is where Everett Cole made the choice that would change the rest of his life. He looked at this stranger, this exhausted man standing in the gravel outside a garage that wouldn't exist by Monday morning, and he did the math he always did. Parts cost, labor time, overhead. The numbers assembled themselves in his head the way they always had, automatic after 50 years. And then he looked at the man's face again, looked at the particular quality of the exhaustion there, the specific weight in it that went deeper than road miles in a long day of riding. There was something else in that face, something that had nothing to do with the motorcycle and everything to do with why he needed to be in Oakland by morning. He let the math go. What have you got? Everett asked. The man reached into his front pocket and pulled out a fold of bills. He didn't count them for effect. He just held them out flat in his palm, the way you hold something out when you want someone to see the truth of it clearly, without theater, without apology. $43. Everett looked at the money, looked at the man. That won't cover the parts. I know that. I figured you did. A long silence. The flickering light inside the garage pulsed through the window glass in slow, patient rhythms. The highway was completely empty in both directions. Nothing moving as far as Everett could see in either direction, just the white lines and the blacktop, and the desert spreading out on both sides until it became the dark. You got somewhere to be, Everett said. Somebody waiting. Something moved through the man's expression. Not a flinch, not a crack, just the shadow of something passing across his face. The look of a man accessing a place inside himself that he'd been keeping carefully managed all night, that he'd been keeping the lid on for 6 weeks, and wasn't about to stop keeping the lid on now, just because he was standing in a stranger's parking lot at 11 o'clock on a Sunday. There was a man, he said, choosing the words slowly and with care. My chapter president, he died 6 weeks ago. Our chapter's riding his ashes to Oakland tomorrow morning for the memorial. Every member of our chapter riding together. He paused. I'm the one carrying them. He reached back and touched the leather bag strap behind the seat, not adjusting it, not checking the strap, just touching it. The way you touch something that is not just a thing, that is the last physical connection to a person who is no longer in the world. Everett understood then, not every detail, not yet, but the weight of it. The kind of obligation that doesn't negotiate with inconvenience. The kind of thing a man carries, not because he has to, but because there is no version of himself he can live with that would put it down. He knew something about that kind of obligation. He'd spent 4 years learning about it in hospital rooms. What's your name? Everett asked. Ray. Ray Mercer. Everett Cole. He nodded toward the open garage door, where the light was still on, where the tools were still on the walls, where the lathe his father had bought used in 1973 was still standing in the corner waiting for the next piece of work. Bring her inside. Ray looked at him steadily. I told you what I've got. I heard you. Everett was already moving toward the garage door, already thinking about the parts cabinet, already running the job in his head. Bring her inside, Ray. There was a pause long enough to mean something, long enough to be a man understanding what was being offered and deciding how to receive it, short enough not to be argument. Then Ray Mercer put his shoulder into the handlebar and pushed the Harley forward, and the wheels rolled through the gravel and over the threshold and into the light of a garage that was supposed to be finished, but apparently had one more night of work left in it. Everett had worked fast before. He'd worked through nights before. There had been jobs over the years that had demanded everything he had and then asked for more. The transmission overhaul on the 1969 Chevelle that had taken 22 hours straight, the engine rebuild on the touring Harley, the summer before Sylvia's diagnosis, when he'd worked until his hands stopped working right, and he'd had to stop and flex them for 10 minutes before he could continue the weekend. He'd spent chasing an electrical fault through a 1973 BMW that turned out to be a single corroded ground wire buried behind the instrument cluster, invisible until you knew exactly where to look. He knew what it meant to work with complete focus. He knew what it meant when the work was all there was. But this was different from all of those. Maybe it was the last night quality of it. When everything is already gone, when the future you've been protecting has already been taken. There is a strange and unexpected freedom in the work. No future to protect, no investment to guard, no careful calculation of what this job was worth against what the next one might cost. Just the job in front of you demanding your full attention, giving you something to be completely present inside of. Just the work and the man waiting for it, and the desert night outside, and the road that needed to be driven before dawn. He started with a full tear down of the lower end, pulled the primary cover, drained what oil remained, not much, and confirmed his diagnosis within the first 20 minutes. Both connecting rods were damaged. The big end bearing on the front cylinder had seized and released catastrophically. That had been the gunshot crack on the highway, the sound of metal deciding it was finished, and the rear cylinder had followed shortly after from the resulting pressure imbalance. He'd seen this pattern before, usually on bikes that had been ridden hard for too long on oil that should have been changed several thousand miles ago. When did you last service her? Not accusing, just professional. Just needing to understand what he was working with. Ray was sitting on the stool near the tool wall, the stool where Everett's mother used to set him when he was small enough to need setting somewhere safe, while the grown-up work happened around him. Couple months, Ray said, but she's been ridden hard, I can tell. Everett set the damaged rods on the workbench and went to the parts cabinet. He pulled 3 drawers, considered what he found, pulled 2 more. Found what he was looking for, and held it up to the light, turning the blanks, slowly checking the stock dimensions against the job in his head. Good news, he said. I've got blanks that'll work. He set them on the workbench beside the damaged rods. Bad news is, I'll be on the lathe for about 90 minutes before I can do anything else. I'm not going anywhere, Ray said. The lathe work was quiet and precise. The way all the best work is quiet and precise when the person doing it knows what they're doing and has stopped needing to think about the mechanics of the process and can just do the work the way a musician plays a song they've played 10,000 times. The steady hum of the South Bend, the smell of cutting oil, the slow transformation of raw steel into something with a specific purpose, a specific dimension, a specific place in a machine that needed it. Everett got into the rhythm of it, which was a rhythm he knew in his hands, in his body more than in his mind, a rhythm that had been there since he was 11 years old, standing at the same machine with his father's hand guiding his. Ray watched without talking. Everett appreciated that more than he could have said. Some people treated silence like an emergency that needed addressing, like the absence of sound was a problem to be solved. Ray seemed to understand that silence between men doing serious things was its own form of respect, its own kind of conversation. It was around 1:30 in the morning when Ray spoke. You always work this late. Only on special occasions, Everett said without looking up from the lathe. Like what kind of special occasions? Everett finished the cut he was making before he answered, held the machined rod up to the light, checked the tolerances against his mental model of what the specification required, ran his thumb along the surface. Set it down, like the last night, he said. Ray was quiet for a moment. Last night of what? This garage. Everett picked up the second blank and repositioned it in the chuck with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this thousands of times. Banks taking it Monday morning. Developer bought the debt 18 months ago and has been waiting ever since. He nodded toward the foreclosure notice still stuck to the inside of the door, the last one he'd stopped tearing down. Ray looked at it for a long moment without saying anything. How long has this place been here? My father opened it in 71. Everett began the next cut, listening to the steel the way his father had taught him to listen. I grew up on that stool you're sitting on. My mother used to bring me here in a car seat when my father was working weekends. I changed my first oil filter when I was 9 years old, right there in that first bay. And now, Everett shrugged, not carelessly, not dismissively, but with the particular shrug of a man who has already done his grieving about something and come out the other side of it into something quieter and more settled than grief. Now a developer named Gerald Whitmore is going to put up a refrigerated warehouse for an online retailer. He told the city council it would bring 40 jobs at $16 an hour. Sounded real good in the meeting, I'm sure. Ray said nothing, but something shifted behind his eyes. Some private assessment Everett couldn't read. You got family, Ray asked. Had a wife. Everett kept his attention on the work on the steel, on the thing he could still control tonight. Sylvia. We were married 23 years. She got sick in 2020. We spent 4 years fighting it. A pause that had its own weight. We lost. Ray didn't offer condolences, didn't say she's in a better place, or I'm so sorry for your loss, or any of the things people say because they don't know what else to do with someone else's grief. He just let the information exist in the room, which felt more honest than any of the standard responses. He let it sit there with its full weight undiluted by reassurance. Children, Ray asked. No. Everett set down the second machine rod and held both of them up together against the light, comparing them, checking them. We tried, didn't happen. Then Sylvia got sick, and after that, there wasn't room for anything except the fight. He looked at the rods. These will do. Let me get them fitted. I was back inside the engine case working by feel as much as by sight when Ray said something that made Everett go still. In the particular way you go still when something lands exactly in the place you weren't expecting it. The man whose ashes I'm carrying. His name was Tommy Briggs. We called him Briggs. He was president of our Oakland chapter for 19 years. Everett kept his hands in the engine. But he was listening differently now. The way you listen when you understand that what's being said matters. He had a saying, Ray continued. Something he'd say when people asked him why he did things that didn't seem to benefit him directly. He'd say a man's worth isn't what he charges. It's what he does when nobody's watching and nobody's paying. A pause. I've been thinking about that a lot tonight, since I pulled in here. Everett didn't respond right away. He finished fitting the first rod, checked the torque against his mental reference, moved to the second. Sounds like he was a good man, he said finally. I was the best man I knew. Something in Ray's voice stayed level, but just barely the way a surface stays flat when there's enormous pressure beneath it. We lost him in August. Heart went in his sleep. He paused. Part of me thinks that was a mercy because the idea of Briggs going slow, going in a bed with tubes and machines, that just doesn't fit who he was. He was always moving, always doing something for somebody. He said he was going to die on the road. A quiet sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something that wasn't. In a way, I guess he is. They sat with that for a moment. Just the sound of the work and the desert night outside and the highway that wasn't carrying anyone anywhere at 1:30 in the morning. How far have you ridden tonight? Everett asked. Left Flagstaff at 9. She started going bad around Kingman. I knew she was struggling before that, honestly. I thought I could make it. But you couldn't. But I couldn't afford not to make it. Ray looked at him directly with the eyes of a man who needed to be understood on this specific point. You understand what I mean? Everett understood completely. He picked up the torque wrench and kept working. Around 3 in the morning, Ray got up from the stool and started handing tools without being asked. He clearly wasn't a mechanic. He referred to things by description rather than name the long flat one, the one with the bent end, the heavy one with the red handle. But he was attentive and quick and genuinely useful, and having a second pair of hands made a real difference to the time. Everett figured it saved them 40 minutes at least, maybe more. You ride much? Everett asked. Since I was 19. Ray handed over the breaker bar without being asked, having learned enough by watching to anticipate what came next. 30-some years, started in Memphis, been in Oakland 20 years now. You ever stop riding? Ray considered this. Once, for about 8 months after an accident in 97. My collarbone. He paused. Worst 8 months I can remember. Not because of the pain, because of the not riding. Everett nodded. You ride every weekend when I was in my 20s. He accepted the breaker bar and applied it to the next fastener. Sold the bike when Sylvia got sick. Needed the money. He paused. Never replaced it. You miss it. Everett thought about it seriously the way he'd been thinking about everything tonight, without the protective layer of easy answers. I miss who I was when I wrote it, he said. Ray was quiet for a moment. Then that's probably the same thing. Neither of them spoke for a while after that. The work moved forward. The night moved forward. Outside Route 66 was completely empty, the desert holding the specific silence it holds in the hours before dawn, when even the wind stops and the whole world seems to be waiting for something. At 4:20 in the morning, Everett set the seat back in place, checked the primary chain tension for the second time, and stood up. Every joint in his back immediately and thoroughly expressed its opinion about 4 hours on a concrete floor. He was 52 years old, and his body had been forming this opinion since approximately 2 a.m. and was now delivering it without reservation. I went to the wall, connected the battery tender, and then went back through his work from the very beginning, every connection, every fitting, every torque point. He did it twice methodically without hurrying the way his father had taught him. Check it once for yourself, Harlan used to say. Check it again for the person who's going to be on it at highway speed. Because if something goes wrong at highway speed, you don't get a chance to fix it. All right, Everett said finally. Let's see what we've got. He connected the battery. The electronics came alive across the dash, orange and green lights glowing in the dimness of the bay. He looked at Ray. Ray stepped up to the bike with the deliberate ease of someone who had been doing this for 30-some years and had never lost the respect for the moment when a machine wakes up. He swung his leg over, cleanly settled into the seat, found neutral. His right hand closed on the throttle with the instinct of long practice. Go ahead, Everett said. Ray kicked it over. The engine turned, caught, almost, turned again, fighting for it. And then with a sound like something waking from a very long and reluctant sleep, like something that had been gone, finding its way back, it settled into an idle that was even and strong and completely perfectly correct. The sound filled the garage the way a voice fills a room when the right person is speaking. Not loud but full, present, alive. Ray sat on the running bike with his head slightly bowed and listened to it. Just listened for a long moment, giving it the full attention it had earned. Then he looked up at Everett. She sounds better than when I bought her. She should. Everett picked up the shop rag from the bench and wiped his hands slowly. Those rods I machined are better spec than stock. Tighter tolerances. She'll run cleaner. Ray let the engine run for a full minute, listening to it the way you listen when you know exactly what you're listening for, and everything is saying exactly the right thing. Then he shut it off and swung his leg over and stood facing Everett in the sudden quiet of the bay. The eastern sky through the garage door had begun its first movement toward morning. Not light yet nothing. You could call light, but the quality of the dark had changed. It had become the kind of dark that knows it won't last much longer. Ray reached into his vest, then stopped. Something in his expression shifted, made a decision. His hand found the zipper of the vest and pulled it down slowly and deliberately, the motion of a man choosing to show you something rather than letting you find it by accident. Everett had suspected it from early in the evening, from small things. The way Ray referred to his chapter, the way he talked about Tommy Briggs, The particular brotherhood in how he spoke about obligation and loyalty and what men owed each other. He'd suspected it and chosen not to make assumptions and kept working because the work was the work regardless. But seeing the patch was different from suspecting it. The death's head, the rocker above and below, the three words that everyone in America would recognize that carried every association the culture had built up around them over 70 years. Hell's Angels. Everett looked at it. He didn't step back. He didn't change his expression. He looked at it the way he'd looked at the damaged connecting rods, directly without drama, as a fact that needed to be assessed and understood before anything else could happen. Ray watched him take it in, waiting. Does that change anything? Ray asked. Everett met his eyes. Does it change what I did tonight? No. Then it doesn't change anything. Ray studied him for a long moment, reading something in Everett's face, checking whether the answer was real or just polite. Apparently satisfied with what he found, he zipped the vest back up. He extended his hand. Men like you, he said quietly, disappear too fast in this world. Everett shook his hand. Get to Oakland, he said. Give Briggs a good ride. Ray picked up the leather bag from the workbench, the bag with the steel urn inside, and strapped it behind the seat with careful, specific attention, checking each connection twice, the way you check something you are not willing to lose at any speed on any road. He rolled the Harley out of the garage and into the cool desert morning. The sound of the engine outside was different from the sound inside, wider reaching, further mixing with the air in the space of the highway, rather than bouncing off concrete walls. In the lot he stopped, looked back. Everett was standing in the garage doorway, coffee mug in hand, the flickering light behind him, throwing his shadow long across the gravel toward the highway. What's going to happen to this place? Ray asked. Everett looked up at the sign above the door, Hol's Motor and Cycle. The letters had been repainted 3 times over 53 years. He could still see the ghost of the original lettering underneath, if he looked in the right light at the right angle. The first version, the version Harlan had painted himself in the summer of 1971. I don't know, he said, but it had a good run. Ray held his gaze for another moment, long enough to mean he'd heard it. Really heard it, not just the words, but what was underneath them. Then he nodded once, started the engine, and rolled out onto the empty highway. The tail light shrank in the darkness, moving steadily west, getting smaller and smaller until the desert swallowed it completely. Everett stood in the doorway and watched until there was nothing left to watch. Then he went inside, sat down in the folding chair in the center of the bay, and finished his coffee. The flickering light kept its patient rhythm in the corner, the same rhythm it had been keeping since 1987. The foreclosure notice was still on the door. The half-packed box was still on the floor where he'd left it hours ago. The photograph of Harlan was still wrapped in the shop rag at the bottom of the box, and Sylvia's mug was back on the shelf where it lived because he'd unwrapped it again sometime around midnight, without quite deciding, to some part of him unwilling to pack it away, even on the last night, unwilling to put it somewhere it couldn't be seen. He had about 3 hours until Monday began. He sat in the quiet of his father's garage, surrounded by 53 years of tools and memory, and the specific smell of oil and metal and old wood that had been the background radiation of his entire life. He sat in it and breathed it and let it be what it was. And for the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel like he was losing something. He felt like he had done something that mattered, something real in the middle of the night with no audience and no reward and no future to protect. He'd fixed a man's motorcycle and sent him down the road towards something that mattered. And whatever came next, whatever Monday brought, whatever the week after brought, whatever was left of his life after the garage was gone, that would always have happened. That was enough for now. It would always be enough. The coffee went cold while he sat there, but he kept holding the mug. Dawn came slowly, the way desert dawns do, not all at once, but in stages. The dark becoming less dark, becoming gray, becoming the first pale suggestion of color along the eastern horizon. By the time the sky was fully light, Everett had been sitting in the folding chair for 3 hours, not sleeping, not packing, not doing anything except being present in the place that was almost no longer his. The sound of a car pulling into the lot brought him back. He checked his watch, 6:58. The car door slammed, footsteps on gravel, purposeful and unhurried. Gerald Whitmore came through the side door in a fresh version of the same presentation he'd made the morning before the gray suit. The chain store coffee, the smile that had been maintained past the point of resembling anything genuine. He moved through the door with the easy assurance of a man who considered his arrival expected and his authority established. Everett, he said with the warmth of someone greeting a colleague. Like the 18 months of systematic debt acquisition had been a mutual project they'd undertaken together. It's still my garage, Everett said. Until midnight. It's Sunday. Whitmore looked around the space with the expression he always wore in here. The expression of a man whose mind was already elsewhere. Already in the future. Already seeing the walls torn down, and the slab poured, and the refrigerated storage units rising in the desert air. His eyes moved across the tools and the workbenches and the lathe and the photographs without landing on any of them. I just wanted to make sure we're aligned on the timeline, Whitmore said, setting his coffee on Harlan's workbench, without asking the same way he'd done it yesterday morning. Bank takes formal possession at midnight. My crew is scheduled for 8 Monday morning. I'd hate for there to be any confusion during the transition. You drove out here at 7 on a Sunday morning to tell me what I already know. Whitmore's smile adjusted slightly, not disappearing, just recalibrating. Look, the last few times we've talked, you've had a tendency to make things complicated. I want this to go smoothly. For everyone. You mean for you. For everyone. The smile came back to its full setting. I'll have my people here at 8. If you're not cleared out, they'll have to work around you, and that gets messy. Everett was quiet. Whitmore took that as agreement and moved toward the door. Gerald Everett said. The developer stopped, turned. Something in the way Everett had said his name made him pause in a way he wouldn't have paused otherwise. My father built this building himself. Everett didn't raise his voice, didn't perform anything, just stated facts the way he'd been stating facts his entire working life. He poured the foundation and framed the walls and ran the electrical. Took him 8 months working around a hand injury that never healed, right? Because there wasn't money for proper treatment, only money for materials and hardware, and the belief that if he built it right, it would last. He opened on a Tuesday in July of 1971, and he never missed a Tuesday in 30 years. He paused. I changed my first oil filter in this bay when I was 9 years old. I met my wife at a cookout in this parking lot in the summer of '98. I sat in the office in my father's chair and held her hand the morning we found out she was sick, and I sat in it again the morning after we lost her because I didn't know where else to go. Another pause. I just wanted you to know what it is you're tearing down, not what it's worth in square footage. What it is. Whitmore was quiet for about 4 seconds, which was long enough for something genuine to move across his face before the professional surface came back over it. I know this is hard, he said, and he left. Everett listened to the car back out of the lot, the tires on the gravel, the engine pulling away, the sound diminishing and then gone. Then he sat back down in the folding chair and looked at the concrete floor between his boots. I thought about Ray Mercer somewhere on the highway between here and California, carrying Tommy Briggs toward Oakland on an engine that was running cleaner than it had run in years. He thought about what Ray had said before he rode out. Men like you disappear too fast in this world. He held on to that. It helped. Not enough to fix anything, but it helped. His phone buzzed on the workbench. Unknown number, California area code. Something made him pick up. He didn't know what. Maybe the area code. Maybe just the habit of 50 years. Cole's Motor and Cycle, he said. Pure reflex, pure habit, 50 years of answering the phone the same way regardless of what was happening around him. There was a pause. Then is this Everett Cole speaking? My name is Lucas Vane. I'm calling from Oakland. The voice was unhurried and deep, the voice of a man who had learned long ago that volume was unnecessary when presence was sufficient. Ray Mercer gave me your number. He made it to the memorial. I wanted you to know that personally. Something released in Everett's chest. Not dramatic, just a tension he'd been holding without realizing it, a breath he'd been keeping back. Good, he said. How's the bike running? Ray says she purrs like something new. Says whatever you did to the engine, she's running better than she has in years. A brief pause. He also told me about the garage, about what tonight is. Everett was quiet. It's not a story worth telling, he said finally. I disagree with that completely. Lucas's voice was level and certain. Everett, you did something last night that you had every reason not to do. For a stranger, at midnight, on the last night of your own business, with nothing to gain from it. He let that sit for a moment. You need to understand what that means to us. What it means to me. It means I fixed a motorcycle. I'm a mechanic. That's what I do. No, Lucas Vane said, and his voice dropped a degree into something more personal, more direct. It means you made sure Tommy Briggs got his last ride, the way it was supposed to happen. He paused. Tommy built our chapter the same way your father built that garage, with his hands and his word and nothing else, and 50 years of showing up. And because of what you did last night, he got home. His voice stayed level. That's not something we forget. Everett had nothing to say to that. He sat in the folding chair and let the silence be what it was. Ray tells me you're losing the property today, Lucas said. Midnight tonight. Is there anything that can be done legally, financially? It's done. Everett looked at the foreclosure notice on the inside of the door. The bank transferred the note months ago. Developer has the permits and the approval. It's been done for a while, honestly. He stopped. I just kept fighting it because... He stopped again because the real answer was more than he wanted to put into words. Because giving it up felt like burying his father and his wife at the same time. He didn't say that. It doesn't matter now. It's done. A long pause on the line. Everett Lucas said finally, I want you to do something for me. Sit tight today. Don't make any decisions. Don't sign anything anyone puts in front of you. Don't let anyone on that property without a clear legal right to be there. He paused. Can you do that? I can do that. But I don't understand what Ray trusted you last night with something that mattered more than money. Lucas's voice was quiet and direct and completely certain. Now I'm asking you to trust us. The same way. Just for today. The line went quiet. Everett held the phone for a moment after it ended. Then he set it on the workbench and looked at the foreclosure notice for a long time. He didn't know what Lucas Vane was planning. He didn't know if it would change anything, but he'd told a stranger to bring his bike inside at midnight and worked until dawn on the last night of everything because it had felt like the right thing to do. And this felt like the right thing too. The same quality, the same wordless place where right things live. So he stayed. He made more coffee. He sat. He waited. Dennis Albright called at 10. Everett's lawyer was a good man, careful, methodical, had been practicing out of a Flagstaff office for 30 years, and had the slightly worn competence of someone who had seen too many clients make decisions from grief that their situations couldn't support. The bank had sent a final acknowledgement document. It needed Everett's signature on the possession timeline. Don't sign it, Everett said. Everett, if you don't acknowledge the timeline, they can accelerate. Don't sign it, Dennis. Can you tell me why not yet? A long pause. Dennis made the sound of a man who recognized what a client running on something other than legal strategy sounded like, and who had been practicing long enough to know when to stop arguing and start waiting. All right, but there is nothing legally we can do to stop the foreclosure at this point. Whatever someone has told you, the arithmetic hasn't changed. I know the arithmetic. I just need today. Norma Pratt arrived at 11 with a covered dish and a thermos and the quiet competence of a woman who had spent 40 years teaching other people's children and understood that sometimes the most useful thing you could do for someone was show up and stay and not require anything from them in return. She was 68, white-haired, steady in the way of someone who had been genuinely kind for so long that it had become structural, just part of how she was built, indistinguishable from her bones. Is there anything I can do? Just be here, Everett said. I think today might be something. I'm not sure what yet, but something. She put the dish in the small refrigerator in the back and settled into a chair near the office door with her coffee and a paperback she didn't open, and she was there present and unhurried and completely without requirement which was exactly what she'd offered and exactly what he needed. Ray called at noon, stepping away from the memorial service. His voice was rougher than it had been during the night, worn down by the ceremony and the emotion and the weight of carrying something for 100 miles through the desert and finally delivering it to where it was supposed to go. "How are you holding up?" Everett asked. "I'm okay," which meant he wasn't but was handling it. "We rode him in this morning, all 48 of us, through the city streets to the water." He paused. It was right. It was exactly right. He would have loved every minute of it. "I'm glad you made it," Everett said. "I'm glad I was there." A pause. "Everett, Lucas is serious about what he told you. I want you to understand that. He doesn't make calls like that one unless he means every word of them." "What is he working on, Ray?" A silence that held something warm in it, something almost like affection. "You'll see," Ray said. "Just stay." The call from Whitmore's assistant came at one professionally pleasant, confirming the Monday morning start time and noting that personal property remaining after midnight would be cataloged as abandoned. "Tell Mr. Whitmore that I'll be here," Everett said, and hung up. He stood, stretched his back, walked to the garage door, and leaned against the frame. Route 66 ran straight and empty in both directions, the desert spreading out on both sides, red and gold and ancient, and utterly indifferent to any of the human arrangements happening along its edge. The highway had been here before the garage, and would be here after whatever Whitmore built, and would be here long after that too, carrying people west the way it had been carrying them for 100 years. I thought about Harlan standing in this doorway in July of 1971, looking out at this same road on the first day. "The road will bring you what you need," Harlan used to say. "All you have to do is be here when it arrives." Everett went back inside and started reorganizing the tool wall. Not packing, organizing. Every hook, every shadow board, every tool in its correct and proper place. If this was the last day, he wanted the place in order. He wanted it to look the way it was supposed to look. He wanted to leave it right. He was still at the tool wall at 2:17 in the afternoon when he heard it. He heard it before he understood what he was hearing. A sound from the west, from out on the highway, that was too large to be a single thing and too organized to be weather. A sound that built and built without breaking, rolling in from the horizon with the patience of something that has been on its way for a long time and is only now arriving, growing in volume and complexity with each passing second until the windows of the garage were beginning to hum with it. Everett set down the wrench he was holding. He walked to the garage door. He looked out at Route 66, and then he saw them. They came out of the west like a weather system, like something the desert had been building for a long time and was now releasing all at once. A column of motorcycles that stretched back further than he could see from the lot, riding in tight formation, two abreast, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that looks effortless from outside it and takes years of shared road miles to achieve. Chrome catching the afternoon sun in brief bright flares, black leather, colors on every back, the low organized thunder of 60 engines running together, not a roar but a sustained roll. Something felt as much as heard, something that moved through the ground under Everett's feet and through the walls of the garage and through his chest. 40 riders, 50, more than that. They filled the highway from the center line to the shoulder, and they kept coming around the long curve from the west. More of them, an apparently inexhaustible supply of them. Chrome and leather, and the sound of organized power moving at highway speed. At the front of the column, riding side by side, Ray Mercer sitting straight in the saddle on the rebuilt Harley, its engine running with the clean, even authority of work done properly. And beside Ray, a man Everett had never seen before, but recognized immediately as the kind of man other men follow, without needing to be asked. Taller, broader, riding a blacked-out touring bike, with the settled authority of someone who had been the point of every formation he'd ever been part of, who had made the decisions that needed making and lived with the consequences and kept going. The column turned into the lot. Not some of them, not a representative group, all of them. 60-plus motorcycles rolling in slowly and filling every inch of the parking lot of Cole's Motor and Cycle, the sound shifting from collective highway thunder to individual engines idling, and then one by one, in no particular order, but with a kind of organic inevitability, the engine stopped. One and then another until the last one cut out, and the lot was packed tight with men and machines, and the silence that followed was somehow larger and heavier than the noise had been. Everett stood in the garage doorway and did not move, did not speak, did not quite breathe. Ray swung off his bike and walked toward him. Behind Ray, the tall man dismounted with the unhurried certainty of someone who moved at exactly the pace he chose and walked in the same direction. Behind him, the lot full of riders simply waited still and patient and watchful. 60 men who understood how to wait and why waiting sometimes mattered as much as moving. You stayed, Ray said. You told me to. Lucas told you to. Lucas told me to trust you. Everett looked past Ray at the riders, at the colors and the leather, and the absolute composure of 60 men in his parking lot. I trusted you. Ray almost smiled, not quite, but close. He stepped aside and gestured to the tall man beside him. Everett Cole Ray said, Lucas Vane, President Oakland Chapter. Lucas extended his hand. The grip was direct and complete, nothing performed about it. Everett Cole. Lucas, Everett said. Lucas looked at him for a moment. Not the look of a man deciding whether to trust you, but the look of a man deciding how much of the truth to lead with when he already knows the answer to everything else. I want to tell you something, he said, and I want you to hear it the way I mean it, not the way it might sound at first. All right. Last night you did something for one of my men that cost you what was probably the last good night's work you'll ever do in this building. He paused. You did it knowing you'd get nothing in return. You did it because it was right. And in doing it, you made sure that a man we all loved got his last ride the way it was supposed to happen. His voice stayed level, unhurried and certain. I've been riding for 37 years. I've met a lot of people on a lot of roads. Men who do what you did for strangers with nothing to gain in the middle of their own hardest night, those men are rare. His eyes held Everett steadily. And they're getting rarer every year. Everett looked at him. It was one night's work, he said. That's all. No, Lucas said with the quiet certainty of someone correcting something that matters. It was considerably more than that. And I think you know it. A silence settled between them. The kind of silence between people who are both being honest and both know it. Then Lucas said, I want to buy this property. Everett looked at him. Cash, Lucas continued. Full market value. Today. Everett's mind took a moment to arrange those words and understand what they meant together. The bank holds the note, he said. The debt is a number, Lucas said. We can cover the number. He paused. The foreclosure can be stopped if the outstanding debt is cleared before midnight tonight. I've already spoken to a real estate attorney. Arizona law gives us a window. It's possible. Whitmore has contracts. Whitmore has letters of intent, Lucas said. Letters of intent contingent on the foreclosure completing. If the debt is cleared before the transfer executes, those letters become void. The contingency language is in the body of his own contract. He held Everett's gaze. We've been thorough about this. Everett looked from Lucas to Ray and back. Something was happening in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. He recognized it but couldn't quite name it. It was rawer than hope. It was what existed before hope, before you'd learned to protect yourself from hoping. Why, Everett said. Why would you do this? Lucas told him the truth without softening it or surrounding it with sentiment. Because this location is valuable to us. He said it plainly, like a man who respected the person he was talking to, enough to start with the practical reality. You sit on Route 66 between California and Nevada on a corridor our people ride year-round. There is no good neutral stop between Barstow and Flagstaff. No place that's safe that knows bikes that won't create problems the moment a group of our riders pulls in. Your garage is exactly what we've been looking for 10 years. He paused. The fact that the man who runs it is someone we already know, we can trust, that's not incidental. That's the whole thing. Everett absorbed this. So this isn't charity. No. Lucas was direct. It's business. He paused. It's both. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. He let that land before continuing. We'd want a partnership. The club funds the operation equipment, overhead operating capital, whatever the business needs to function properly. You run the shop, you stay the mechanic, you keep the name on the sign. He looked at Cole's motor and cycle above the garage door. That name means something on this highway. We want it to keep meaning something. Everett turned and looked at his father's garage. The lathe in the corner. The workbench Harlan had built. The parts cabinet with its accumulated private logic. The photograph on the wall. Harlan in 1971, grinning wrench in hand. Sylvia's mug on the shelf back in its place, back where it belonged. I thought about Harlan's fundamental belief about this highway. Be where people stop. He thought about Ray Mercer rolling into this lot at midnight with $43 and an engine that had destroyed itself and a reason that mattered more than money. He thought about what it had felt like to do the work last night. Not the grief of ending. Something else. The completeness of doing something right all the way through from beginning to end without reservation. He turned back to Lucas Vane. What happens if I say no, he asked. Lucas didn't hesitate. We drive back to Oakland. This garage becomes a warehouse. You find somewhere else to be. He held Everett's eyes without flinching. No hard feelings, no pressure. That's the truth. A pause, but I don't think you're going to say no. Everett looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, before we go any further, you need to understand something about how I work. Lucas waited. I don't adjust my standards based on who's paying or who's watching. I don't look away from something wrong because it's inconvenient to see it. If a job needs doing right, it gets done right. Every time. That's not negotiable with me. It never has been, good Lucas said. Simply and completely. That's exactly why we want you. Everett looked at the 60 men in his lot. At the desert afternoon going gold across the highway. At the sign above the door with the letters that had been repainted 3 times and still held. Call your attorney, he said. Lucas made the call standing in the middle of the parking lot in full view of Everett, which Everett immediately understood was deliberate. No back rooms, no side conversations. Whatever was about to happen would happen in the open where Everett could see every move of it. Patricia Holden picked up on the second ring, the kind of attorney who answered on Sunday afternoons because the people she worked with sometimes needed things done on Sunday afternoons. Lucas had her on speed dial. Patricia, we're at the property. Everett has confirmed. What's our window? Everett could hear her voice through the phone, precise and clipped and completely oriented toward the practical. The specific language of Arizona foreclosure law. The bank's weekend processing window. The narrow corridor between debt cleared and property transferred. Lucas listened, checked his watch. We've got until 9 tonight, he told Everett. After 9, the bank system runs the overnight process, and the transfer executes automatically at midnight. The wire has to clear before 9 o'clock. It's 2:30, Everett said. I know. Lucas went back to the phone. Patricia, initiate the wire. Full debt clearance. All outstanding liens attached to the Coles motor and cycle parcel. Everything. Tonight. He ended the call and put the phone away with the calm efficiency of a man who had made consequential decisions before and understood that second-guessing them was a luxury that cost more than it was worth. Everett looked at him. You're doing this right now. You haven't negotiated terms. You don't have anything formal in writing. I know what I need to know about you, Lucas said, without arrogance, just as plain fact. Ray told me enough last night. He paused. Terms we work out face to face the way things should be worked out. I don't need 40 pages of paper to tell me whether a man is worth trusting. Before Everett could respond to that, a black SUV came hard off the service road along the south side of the property and stopped fast in the gravel. Gerald Whitmore got out while the engine was still running. I took in the lot full of motorcycles. He took in 60 riders standing around them. His face moved through a rapid series of calculations and then settled into the particular hardness of a man who is used to winning and has just understood that something has changed that he didn't authorize. What is this? Whitmore said. Private property, Everett said. Mine until midnight. It's still Sunday. Whitmore's voice had an edge it hadn't carried before. I got a call from the bank. Someone is attempting to clear the outstanding debt. That can't we have an agreement? That's not possible. You have a letter of intent, Lucas said from just behind Everett's shoulder. His voice was completely level. A letter of intent contingent on foreclosure completion. That's not an executed contract. Whitmore turned to look at Lucas for the first time, taking him in fully. The height, the patches, the 60 men arranged in the lot. Something moved through Whitmore's expression that he was working hard to keep managed. Who are you, Lucas Vane? I represent a group of buyers interested in this property. It's not for sale. Whitmore's voice had tightened. I have an executed purchase agreement with the bank. You have a conditional purchase agreement, Lucas said, contingent on the foreclosure completing. If the outstanding debt is cleared before the foreclosure executes, your agreement becomes void. That language is in the body of your own contract. He paused just briefly. You should read the fine print on things you sign. Whitmore's jaw set hard. He turned to Everett with the expression of a man switching to a different strategy. Everett, whatever these people have offered you, whatever they've told you, do you understand what you're getting into? Do you know who these people are? I know Ray Mercer, Everett said. I know Lucas Vane. I know what they've offered and why. He looked at Whitmore steadily. What I don't know is why a man who's been working for 18 months to take my family's property is suddenly so concerned about my welfare. Whitmore adjusted again. This is not a situation you want to be in. These are not people you want doing business with you. And you are, Everett said. A silence. The desert wind moved through the gravel. 60 men watching, saying nothing, their collective stillness, its own kind of weight. Whitmore pulled out his phone. I'm calling my attorney. That's your right, Lucas said pleasantly. Tell him to review Arizona Revised Statutes Title 33, Article 8, the provisions on debt redemption prior to foreclosure completion. Tell him to call Patricia Holden at Holden and Associates in Phoenix. She'll walk him through the specifics. He paused. She's very thorough. Whitmore walked to the far edge of the lot with the phone to his ear. His voice carried in the dry desert air, despite his efforts. Words like injunction, in Sunday judge, and contingency clause, floating back across the gravel. Ray came to stand beside Everett. He watched Whitmore with the expression of a man who has been in enough difficult situations to know how most of them end. Can he stop it? Everett asked quietly. He can try, Ray said. He'd need a judge willing to sign an emergency injunction on a Sunday afternoon based on a letter of intent with a clear contingency clause already in it. Patricia's already thought about that. She's been thinking about it since Lucas called her this morning. Whitmore came back from his phone call looking different than when he'd left. Not defeated, the word wasn't right yet, but the beginning of understanding had arrived, and it showed in how he was standing now, slightly less forward, slightly less certain. There are other options, he said, addressing Everett directly and carefully, not looking at Lucas. I can make you a cash offer, above market for the personal property in this building. You walk away clean, no complications, no entanglements. I'm not walking away, Everett said. Whitmore lowered his voice to something more personal, as though the 60 riders in the lot were not going to hear him regardless of his volume. I have serious institutional capital behind this project. What they're offering you isn't sustainable. What you're getting into isn't what you think it is, Gerald Everett said. Just his name. Nothing elaborate about it. Just his name in a tone that Whitmore had never heard from Everett Cole before. Because Everett Cole had spent 18 months being measured and careful and professional, and this was none of those things. This was something older and quieter and considerably more settled. I've listened to you for 18 months, Everett said. I've read your letters and taken your calls and sat in your office and heard everything you've had to say about why this had to happen the way it happened. He paused. I'm done listening to you. Something moved through Whitmore's expression. Genuine surprise. The surprise of a man who had never heard that particular finality from this particular person before. Whitmore turned to Lucas one final time. You understand this corridor is going to be developed regardless. My project or somebody else's. You can't hold back what's coming. Lucas looked at him with the patient intelligence of a man who has heard this argument before and understands its limits. Mr. Whitmore, I want to make sure you understand something clearly. He spoke without aggression, without any suggestion of threat, just with the measured certainty of someone stating a geographical fact. Our members ride this corridor year-round, Flagstaff to Barstow, every month of the year in groups of varying size. That's a fact about the world that won't change because of any construction project. He paused. Construction projects depend on workers. Workers drive to job sites on public roads. He paused again. I'm not suggesting anything improper. I'm simply noting that certain practical realities exist that aren't captured in any contract document. Whitmore stared at him. The calculation behind his eyes was running fast and arriving somewhere he didn't like. He was doing the math on fighting this versus finding another piece of desert, and the desert had no shortage of empty land. He looked at Everett one last time. You're making a mistake. It wasn't a threat. For the first time in 18 months, it sounded like something real, like a man saying what he actually believed. Maybe Everett said, but it's mine to make. Whitmore got into the black SUV. He sat there for a long moment, long enough that Everett thought he might reconsider, might come back out, might try one more angle. Then he drove away, and the gravel settled behind him, and the sound of his engine diminished and disappeared, and he was gone. The lot was quiet. Then from somewhere near the back of the formation, one rider started his engine. Just one low and steady, then another unhurried. Not revving, not demonstrating anything, just running. The sound of machines at rest, of engines turning over, because that's what engines are made to do. And then more, until the lot was filled with the particular sound of many Harleys idling together, which is less like noise and more like a collective breath. More like a community expressing something that doesn't have words. Ray put his hand on Everett's shoulder. You okay? Ask me in an hour, Everett said. The next 3 hours were unlike any 3 hours Everett Cole had ever lived through, and he had lived through some hours. Patricia Holden called Lucas at 4:15 to confirm the wire had been initiated. She called again at 5:40 to report the bank had received it and was processing. The bank's Sunday duty officer, who had been reached by Patricia at 4 o'clock and was not enthusiastic about it, called Everett directly at 6:10 to verify his identity and confirm that yes, he understood the outstanding debt was being cleared by a third party, and yes, he understood the implications for the foreclosure proceeding currently in process. I understand, Everett said. You're certain about this? The officer had the voice of a man who had seen consequential decisions made under emotional pressure and felt professionally obligated to verify certainty before anything moved forward. I'm certain, Everett said. While the calls were happening, something else was happening in the parking lot that Everett had not anticipated and could not have predicted. The riders were working. It started with two of them, younger men, early 30s, who had wandered into the garage and were looking at the workbenches with the quiet curiosity of people who respect tools and the people who use them. Not touching anything without asking, just looking. Then one of them said very politely that if those boxes stacked in the corner needed to go back on the shelves, he could help with that if Everett wanted. Everett said yes. And then there were 4 helping, and then 8, and then it seemed like every man in the lot had found something useful to do. Tools being reorganized along the shadow board, each one back in its correct position. Boxes unpacked and contents returned to shelves. Someone found the broom propped in the corner and swept the entire bay floor without anyone suggesting it. Someone else, nobody could explain where he'd gotten them, had replacement bulbs for the burned-out fixtures in the back and changed them so the parts of the garage that had been going dim were lit again. The garage that had been slowly going dark over the past weeks was getting its light back, systematically, methodically, by the hands of men who had decided that this was their contribution to a night that mattered. Everett stood in the center of the bay and watched it and felt something happening in him that he couldn't name with any precision. Not overwhelmed, the word wasn't right. More like watching something you'd accepted as finished turning out to not be finished. Like a machine you'd written off suddenly running. Like hearing a piece of music you'd forgotten you knew and finding that you still knew every note. An older rider came and stood beside him. Late 60s, broad white-haired, with the comfortable gravity of someone who had been riding long enough to have arrived at something like peace about most of it. First time Lucas bought into a property, the man said without introducing himself. Just starting where he meant to start was a bar in Reno that was going under. Owner had been riding with us 20 years. Lucas was 28, put in everything he had. The man paused. You know what he said when people asked him why? What, because we take care of our own. The man looked at Everett directly. You're not one of us. He looked around the garage at the men working in it. But you acted like it when it mattered. He met Everett's eyes. That counts more than you know. It was one night work, Everett said. The man shook his head slowly. You stayed up all night in a garage you were losing to make sure a brother got to carry his president home. He held Everett's gaze. That's not mechanical. That's moral. There's a difference. Everett had nothing to say to that. He just watched his garage being tended to by strangers who were handling everything in it with more care than most people handle their own things. At 8:47 in the evening, Lucas's phone rang. He answered it standing in the middle of the lot. Whatever Patricia Holden told him made him close his eyes for exactly 2 seconds, long enough for Everett, who was watching, to understand that it was good news and that Lucas was taking a moment to receive it properly before speaking. He ended the call, turned to face Everett. It cleared, Lucas said. 2 words. The weight of something final and irrevocable, but this time final and irrevocable in the right direction. The foreclosure is void. The property is no longer in default. As of 8:47 this evening, Cole's motor and cycle is not going anywhere. From somewhere in the lot, Ray began to clap. Slowly at first, then others joined, and it moved through the 60 riders, the way something real moves when it reaches people who understand what it means. Not a stadium roar, not a performance. Something quieter and more considered and more true. The sound of people marking something that mattered with appropriate weight. Everett stood in the doorway of his garage. He did not cry. He had never been built for crying in parking lots, and this night had not changed that. But something in his face changed. Something deep and structural that had been held under tension for so long that he'd stopped being able to feel the tension itself, had started mistaking it for just the way his face was finally, slowly, in increments, let go. His face became the face of a man who had been holding his breath for 4 years and had just finally been told he could stop. Norma Pratt came from the edge of the lot where she'd been standing with her thermos for the last 2 hours, and she put her arms around him, and he let her, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing that needed saying that wasn't already in it. Above the garage, the neon open sign, dark for 3 weeks since the bank had sent the first formal foreclosure notification, flickered once, twice, then held steady as someone inside found the switch and pushed it. Someone who had decided it was time. The desert night absorbed the glow without diminishing it. Inside Cole's motor and cycle, something that had been going dark was burning again. Gerald Whitmore was somewhere on the highway, driving away from it. The bank had processed a wire it couldn't unprocess, and 60 motorcycles were parked in the lot of a garage that was not going to become a warehouse on Monday morning. Lucas came to stand beside Everett in the doorway. He didn't make a speech. He just stood there for a moment, looking out at the riders in the lot, and the highway beyond them, and the desert beyond that. We should talk terms, he said, when you're ready. Tomorrow, Everett said. Tonight I just want to... He stopped. He wasn't sure how to finish the sentence. There wasn't a word for what he wanted to do tonight. Tonight I just want to be here, he said. Lucas understood without needing the rest of it. Tomorrow, he said. Everett looked at the sign, at the tools through the window reorganized by strangers who had handled them with care, at the flickering light in the back corner still blinking. Patient as ever, the one thing in the garage. Nobody had tried to fix the one thing that didn't need fixing, that just needed to still be there. The old man had believed the highway would provide. He'd been right then. He'd been right tonight. Harlan Cole had opened this garage with $32 and a bad hand, and faith in a highway that would bring him what he needed, and the highway had delivered 60 motorcycles in a wire transfer, and a second chance on a Sunday evening in the dying light, which was exactly the kind of dramatic timing the old man would have appreciated, would have nodded at slowly and said something like, "See, I told you, you just have to be where people stop." Everett pressed his palm flat against the doorframe, the same doorframe his father had stood in on the first day in the photograph on the wall, 26 years old, and grinning like the hard years had never happened. He stood there and breathed. The road had brought him what he needed. All he'd had to do was be there when it arrived. Everett didn't sleep that night either. He hadn't slept the night before, the night of the work, the midnight arrival. The $43, the hours on the concrete floor, listening to the South Bend turn raw steel into something with a purpose. 2 nights now without real sleep, and he lay on the cot in the back office with his eyes open and felt more awake than he had in years. Awake in the specific way you feel when something that had been pressing down on you for a long time has finally irreversibly been lifted. The difference was not in the sounds the garage made. The building settled and popped and breathed the same way it always had. The difference was in how he heard them. He heard them as sounds of a place that was still his, that would still be his tomorrow and the day after, and as far forward as he could see. He heard them as home. I was up before 5 coffee, on before the sky committed to any particular color. Lucas had arranged for his men to settle in for the night, some in sleeping bags in the lot, some at the small motel 3 miles down the highway. They'd been quiet about it, organized, respectful of the property and the neighborhood in ways that Everett hadn't expected and was honest enough with himself to acknowledge he hadn't expected. At 6:15, Lucas knocked on the side door. Everett let him in and poured coffee without asking, set it on the workbench. Lucas took the mug in both hands and looked at the garage with the unhurried attention of a man conducting a real assessment, not valuation, not inventory, but the kind of looking that's about understanding what a place is and how it works and why it matters. I walked the perimeter slowly. He checked the lathe, running his hand along the ways. He opened and closed several of the parts cabinet drawers, noting the labeling system, the accumulated order of it. He crouched and looked at the floor drains. He stood and looked at the ceiling, at the ductwork and the fixture placement. He checked the load-bearing points along the walls. Everett let him look. A man who looked at things properly before he spoke about them was a man worth working with. This equipment, Lucas said finally, the lathe and the mill, all original. The lathe is a '68 South Bend. My father bought it used in '73. The mill is a '71 Bridgeport original to the garage. He gestured toward the far bay. The lift and the diagnostic computer and the welding rig, I bought those myself over the years as the work required them. Lucas looked at the South Bend for a long moment. The lathe and the mill together are worth more than most garages carry in total inventory. I know that. Lucas turned to face him, settled and direct. Let me tell you what I'm thinking. Then you tell me what's wrong with it. We go back and forth until it's right. That's a fair way to do it, Everett said. The club takes on the outstanding debt which Patricia has cleared. So there's no outstanding debt. The property is clean. We capitalize the operation with a $100,000 operating fund held in a separate business account that you have full signing authority over. He paused. The property title transfers to a holding LLC. 50% owned by the club, 50% owned by you. Neither party can sell, encumber, or transfer their interest without the other's written consent. Everett nodded. Who controls the day-to-day operation? You do, Lucas said without hesitation. What you work on, who you hire, what you charge, how you run the shop, that's entirely yours. We don't know what you know about this work. We'd be fools to try to tell you how to do it. He picked up his coffee. We're not buying your skills. We're partnering with them. There's a difference. What do you get out of it? Priority service for club bikes, not free fair market rate paid same day. We don't shortchange people we respect. He paused. And we get a safe stop on this corridor. A place our people know is clean, neutral ground run by someone who can be trusted. When you say neutral ground, Everett said carefully, I need to understand specifically what I'm agreeing to, because I need to be clear about that before anything else. Lucas looked at him with something that might have been appreciation for the directness, for the insistence on specificity before commitment. It means this location is off limits for any club business that isn't motorcycle work. No disputes resolved here. No business conducted here except mechanical work. His voice was direct and clear. I'm not asking you to look the other way on anything. I'm not asking you to be anything other than exactly what you already are. He paused. And if law enforcement comes to this property with questions, you answer them honestly, because there won't be anything here to find. I'm telling you that directly, and I mean it directly. Everett studied him. You're very confident about that. I'm confident about what I can control, Lucas said. And what happens on this property I can control. This location is too valuable to us to compromise. The moment it becomes complicated, it stops being useful. We don't burn down things that work. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to Everett in 18 months of negotiations, which told him something specific about those 18 months and the people he'd been negotiating with. One more thing, Everett said. The name stays. Cole's Motor and Cycle. On the sign, on the paperwork, everywhere. That's not negotiable. Yes. And I can decline any job I choose. Any customer, any work. No explanations required. Yes. And if this partnership stops working for either of us, there's a clean exit that doesn't leave anyone badly positioned. Lucas nodded. Patricia will build a buyout clause into the LLC agreement. Pre-agreed valuation method. Either party wants out, the other has right of first refusal at the agreed price. Clean and fair. He paused. Though I'll tell you honestly, I don't anticipate wanting out. Everett turned the coffee mug slowly in his hands, the plain one. Not Sylvia's, he'd been careful about that this morning and looked at the problem from all the angles he could find. Slowly, without rushing himself toward an answer. Why a partnership, he asked finally. You have the capital to own this property outright. Why keep me here at all, at Bam? Lucas set down his mug. He folded his hands on Harlan's workbench, and when he spoke, it had the weight of something true that doesn't get said often enough. Because a location is just real estate, he said. What you have here isn't real estate. It's a reputation. 53 years of people on this highway, knowing that if they break down or need work, there is one place that will treat them honestly and do the job right. He paused. That reputation is yours. Your father built it, and you kept it, and I cannot buy it. The only way I get what it's worth is if you stay. Everett looked at the workbench, at the photograph of Harlan on the wall, at Sylvia's mug on the shelf where it always lived. Also, Lucas said, and his voice shifted into something slightly less formal, slightly more personal. Ray told me about your wife, about the last 4 years. He didn't elaborate, just the facts plainly. He paused. A man who goes through what you went through and still gets up at midnight on the last night of his garage to fix a stranger's bike for free. That's the man I want running something I care about. That's not your business, Everett said. No, Lucas said, but I'm not wrong. A long silence. Okay, Everett said. Let's do this. He extended his hand. Lucas shook it. The handshake of men who had arrived at a commitment they both understood and were prepared to honor. Outside, the desert morning was building toward its full brightness, the sky going from pale gold to the hard, specific blue of the Mojavean autumn. In the lot, riders were stirring engines, starting for the run back to Oakland. The world continuing with its usual indifference to what had just been decided inside a garage in Kingman, Arizona. Ray came at 7:30 with breakfast burritos from the diner down the road and the practicality of a man who understood that good decisions were easier to make when you'd eaten. Everett ate standing at the workbench. It was the best thing he'd tasted in longer than he could calculate, which said something about the preceding period that he didn't need to examine too carefully. How'd it go? Ray settled onto the stool by the tool wall. Good, Everett said. Lucas is fair, always has been. Ray took a bite and thought about it. People who don't know him assume otherwise. But he's never been anything except straight with me. He's direct. He said the same thing about you. Ray looked at him, said you were the first person in a long time who asked all the right questions without making them sound like accusations. I wasn't accusing him of anything. No, but most people would have been. Ray looked at the tool wall. There's a thing that happens when the people talk to Lucas. They bring their assumptions in with them, and the assumptions get in the way of the actual conversation. He paused. You didn't do that. I had a man in my garage at midnight with $43 and a dead engine and a reason that mattered, Everett said. After that, I figured I could take people as I find them. Ray nodded in the way that meant he understood that from somewhere inside it. At 9 o'clock, Lucas gathered his men with the natural authority of someone who doesn't need to call for attention because attention simply follows him. 60 people who had been moving at their own pace converging toward the same purpose. Bikes started the lot filled with sound, and then in the particular way of people who have traveled together long enough, resolved itself into order. Lucas came to Everett one last time before mounting up. He pulled a plain card from his inside pocket and held it out, just a name and a number. Patricia's number is on the back. She'll have the LLC documents ready by Wednesday. You'll want your lawyer to review them. I will. First club bikes through here will be Saturday. There's a group from Flagstaff. I'll have them call ahead. He paused. We'll send a sign for the window, something small and specific. People who need to know will know what it means. What kind of sign you'll know it when you see it. Anyone who needs to know will know it when they see it too. Lucas extended his hand. They shook differently than yesterday, when everything had still been possibility. The handshake now of men who had made a commitment in full daylight and both understood its weight. Lucas mounted the big touring Harley. It settled under him like it had been waiting. He started it, and the sound rolled through the lot, and the other engines joined it one by one until the air was entirely sound, and then the column formed and moved and turned onto the highway and headed west, the chrome catching the morning light in flashes. The sound diminishing in the clean desert air, smaller and smaller, until there was nothing left of it but the echo, and then not even that. Ray was the last to come to Everett. He stood in front of him with the rebuilt Harley's engine running behind him, and he looked like he was working out what to say, the same way he had in the gravel at midnight 2 nights ago, when he'd first stepped off the bike and everything had been broken and uncertain. That felt like a long time ago and no time at all. I'm going to come back through, Ray said. Not just as a club thing, just to come back. I'll be here. I know. Ray looked at the garage over Everett's shoulder. At all of it. At the sign and the tools and the light in the back corner still blinking its patient rhythm. He would have loved this place. Briggs. He would have walked in here and felt at home immediately. Maybe that's why the bike broke down in my lot, Everett said. Ray looked at him. Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, not quite grief, that thing in between that happens when feelings have been through enough to stop being simple. Maybe it is, he said. He pulled Everett into a brief, hard embrace, the kind that happens between men who have been through something real together and know that words aren't the right instrument for it. Then he stepped back, swung onto the Harley, and kicked it over. The engine caught immediately clean, even strong, and exactly right. The sound of something made well by someone who understood what well-made meant. She sounds right, Everett said. She sounds like you fixed her, Ray said. He rode out into the column, and the column moved and disappeared around the long curve toward California, and Everett stood in the garage door and watched until the last of the sound had dissolved into the desert morning. His garage. He went inside, picked up a wrench, and got back to work. The LLC documents arrived from Patricia Holden's office on Wednesday morning. Dennis Albright called that afternoon with 14 questions, 11 of them legitimate legal concerns about partnership structure and liability. 3 of them, the questions of a man who remained personally uncomfortable with the identity of Everett's new partners, but was professional enough to keep that discomfort mostly below the surface. Everett answered all 14. Dennis flagged 2 clauses called Patricia, and the revisions were agreed upon by Thursday afternoon. By Friday morning, both parties had signed. Cole's Motor and Cycle. The name, the sign, the 53-year reputation on that stretch of Route 66 was safe. Not temporarily, not conditionally, permanently. Everett called Dennis when the confirmation came through. We're done, Everett said. We're done, Dennis said. He paused. Everett, I've been practicing law for 30 years. I have never seen a foreclosure proceeding unwound in a single Sunday afternoon by a wire transfer initiated from a memorial service in Oakland. He paused again. I want you to know I mean that as a compliment. I'll pass it along, Everett said. He sat in his father's chair behind his father's desk and let the silence of the office be what it was. Not empty, full. full of everything that had happened in the last week and everything that had happened in the 53 years before it and everything that was going to happen now. Then he got up and went back to work. The sign arrived on a Saturday morning, 8 days after the Sunday that had changed everything. A rider Everett hadn't seen before, young, maybe 25, riding a clean Sportster with the purposeful quiet of someone accustomed to specific errands, knocked on the garage door with the knock of someone who knew the difference between announcing themselves and interrupting. Everett opened it. The rider held out a flat package in brown paper, roughly a foot square. From Lucas, he said simply, "You want coffee?" The rider looked briefly surprised by the offer. Then yeah, I would. Thanks. They stood in the garage and drank coffee while Everett opened the package. Inside was a piece of black painted steel, hand-cut and hand-finished with 3 letters welded onto it in chrome rod. Not stamped, not printed. Welded by someone who had taken their time and cared about the result and wanted it to last. The letters weren't the club's name. They weren't any identifier that someone outside would recognize. They were a sequence that was nothing if you didn't know and everything if you did. What does it mean? Everett asked. The writer looked at him over his coffee mug. It means this place is clean. It means if you ride in here, you're safe and nobody is looking for trouble with you. He paused. It means the person running this location kept their word when they didn't have to. Another pause. There are maybe 6 places in the whole Southwest with that sign in the window. People who need to know what it means. Everett looked at the sign for a moment. Then he carried it to the front window and set it in the corner facing south, visible from the highway, but not the first thing you'd see looking in. Lucas said you'd know where to put it, the writer said. Corner of the window, Everett said. Visible from the road, but not the first thing you see. The writer looked at where Everett had placed it. Yeah, he said. Exactly right. He finished his coffee, set the mug on the bench with a nod that held genuine appreciation in it, and rode out. Everett stood at the window and looked at the sign for another moment. Small, specific, unassuming to anyone who didn't know, unmistakable to anyone who did. He went back to work. Colt Reeves came to work at the garage on a Tuesday morning in October. I was 22 years old, born and raised in Kingman, and had the mechanical instinct that couldn't be taught, the ability to hear a problem in an engine before the engine fully understood. It had the ability to feel through his hands what was happening inside a machine and know what it meant. Everett had put a small notice in the window 2 weeks after signing the LLC, just 3 lines on an index card, and Colt had come in on a Wednesday morning with clean hands and honest eyes, and the particular quiet confidence of someone who knows they're good at something and doesn't need anyone to tell them so. Everett gave him a carburetor issue on a customer's bike. No background, no symptoms described. Just take a look and tell me what you find. Colt had it in 10 minutes, right the first time. You've done this before, Everett said. Grew up fixing dirt bikes, Colt said. My uncle had a collection. We kept them running mostly through stubbornness and improvisation. That's how everyone learns, Everett said. We just call it experience after the fact. Colt laughed, genuine easy, and he fit into the garage the way the right part fits into the right place, without forcing, without adjustment. Like the configuration had always been the correct one, and the world had just taken a while to arrive at it. Norma Pratt came by every Tuesday with a covered dish she called leftovers, and Everett understood were made specifically for him. He'd stopped arguing about it after the 3rd week, when she'd made it clear she wasn't feeding him out of pity, but because it gave her something purposeful to do on Tuesday mornings, and taking that away from her would be inconsiderate. You seem different, she said one Tuesday in November, setting the dish in the refrigerator with the authority of someone who knew where things went. Different how? She leaned against the workbench with her coffee and thought about it honestly. Lighter, she said finally. You've been carrying something heavy for a long time. Now you're not. She paused. Sylvia would be glad. Everett set down the micrometer he'd been working with. He looked at the mug on the shelf, the chipped letters, the memory inside it. Yeah, he said, she would. He picked up the micrometer and went back to work. Riders came through regularly, not in overwhelming numbers, but steadily, in the way of things that have found their proper rhythm. a group on a Friday, two solo riders on a Wednesday, a couple on a touring trip who'd heard from someone that the mechanic in Kingman was worth the stop. Word moved the way word moves among people who cover ground for a living. Bike to bike, conversation to conversation. The informal network of the road carrying information faster than any algorithm. Sandra Okafor came through with the Flagstaff group in late October. A woman in her 40s who led her group with the compact authority of someone who had been riding longer than most of them and had never felt the need to make a point of it. She watched Everett work through 3 bikes in 40 minutes and paid $60 for a $40 job without comment. She'd be back in 3 weeks, she said. She was. The unexpected development arrived on a Thursday afternoon in December, 4 months after the Sunday that had changed everything. Everett was under a touring bike in the second bay working a primary chain adjustment when Colt appeared at the entrance with the expression he got when something had happened that he wasn't sure how to categorize. "There's a man here in a suit," Colt said. "What kind of suit?" "The kind that costs significantly more than it should have. He asked for you by name, said it's about the property." Everett slid out from under the bike and sat up. His first thought was Whitmore, some new legal mechanism, some angle his attorneys had found in the months since the Sunday he'd driven away. His second thought was that a man who'd found a legal angle would have sent a letter not driven to Kingman in person. He wiped his hands and walked to the front. The man in the suit was around 60, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had navigated genuinely difficult things and come out looking settled rather than beaten. He was carrying nothing except a business card, which he held out when Everett approached. Everett took it. The name on the card was Sterling Calloway. The title underneath said Senior Vice President, Calloway Haddon Capital Partners. Everett looked at the name, then at the man. Sterling Calloway looked back at him steadily with the look of a man who had prepared himself for whatever response was coming and had decided in advance to receive it without deflecting. "I was the lead investor behind Gerald Whitmore's warehouse project," Calloway said, before Everett could ask. He said it directly without softening it or surrounding it with context first. Just the fact delivered to the face of the man it most concerned. The garage was very quiet. Colt, who had followed at a discreet distance and was pretending to be interested in something near the parts cabinet, stopped pretending. Everett looked at Sterling Calloway for a long moment. Not threatening, not performing anything. Just looking the way he looked at an engine he needed to understand before he could begin. "You'd better come in," he said. They stood at Harlan's workbench, and Everett poured coffee, and Calloway wrapped both hands around the mug like a man who needed something solid to hold on to. "I work at the fund level," Calloway said. "I don't typically look closely at individual properties in a portfolio. Whitmore was the operator. I provided capital and stayed removed from the specifics." He paused. "That's not an excuse. It's context. The distinction matters to me even if it doesn't change anything." Everett said nothing. He waited the way he waited for an engine to tell him what it needed. "6 weeks ago," Calloway continued, "I received a phone call from a man named Ray Mercer. He told me what had happened here, what my investment had been used to do." He stopped. "I sat with that information for 3 days. Then I pulled my capital from Whitmore's project." Everett looked at him. "You pulled out within 48 hours of Ray's call." Calloway met his eyes steadily. "Whitmore is currently looking for replacement investors. He's finding it difficult in this market." Something settled in Everett's chest. Not revenge, that word was too clean, too simple for something this human and this complicated. But something that felt like accounts that had been badly out of balance for a long time, beginning slowly and without drama to find their level. "Why are you here?" Everett asked. "You didn't have to come. You could have pulled your money and considered your obligation discharged." "No," Calloway said simply. A pause. "Ray told me what you did that night. The whole thing, the midnight, the $43, the engine, the hours on the floor." He paused, and then he said something I've been thinking about ever since. He said you gave him somewhere to be when he needed it most. Calloway looked at the workbench. "I've spent 40 years making financial decisions. Some of them have been good. Some of them, I've told myself, were neutral, not my problem, too many steps removed from the actual consequence. He met Everett's eyes. This one wasn't neutral, and I needed to say that to your face. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't restore what was almost lost. But it's true, and I needed you to hear it from me directly. Everett looked at him for a long moment. The silver hair and the expensive suit and the business card on the bench between them. A man who had put money behind the attempt to destroy this place and had driven here to say he was sorry about it. You want more coffee? Everett said. Something eased in Calloway's face almost imperceptibly, but Everett saw it. Yes, he said. Thank you. They stood at the workbench and drank coffee, and Calloway asked about the garage, genuinely asked, not making conversation, and Everett answered. And after 20 minutes, it became clear that Sterling Calloway was not simply a suit. He was a man who had grown up with considerably less than he'd ended up with, and who hadn't entirely forgotten what that felt like, and whom Ray's phone call had reached somewhere he'd been keeping very carefully managed for a long time. Before he left, Calloway stood at the front window, looking at the small sign in the corner. The three chrome letters on black steel. Ray told me about that, he said quietly. What it means. Then you know more than most people who come through here, Everett said. Hy told me one more thing. Calloway turned from the window and looked at Everett directly. He said the night his bike broke down in your lot was the night he started to come back from losing his chapter president. He said you gave him somewhere to be when he needed it most. He paused. He wanted to make sure you knew that. In case you didn't. Everett looked at Sylvia's mug on the shelf. The chipped letters. 23 years of marriage condensed into a joke that had become something else entirely over time. I knew, he said finally. But it's good to hear. Calloway shook his hand and left. Everett stood at the window and watched the expensive car pull out of the lot and join the highway and disappear. Colt appeared beside him. That was something Colt said. Yeah. You okay? Everett considered the question with genuine attention. He looked at his father's lathe, the photograph of Harlan in 1971, Sylvia's mug, the tools that had been in this building for 53 years and had outlasted everything that had tried to remove them, the sign above the door, the small chrome piece in the window corner. I'm better than okay, he said. Get back to work. Colt grinned and got back to work. Ray came through on a Friday in January exactly as he'd said he would. Everett heard the Harley before he saw it. He was under a customer's bike in the second bay when the sound came through the concrete floor and through the walls, a specific frequency, a specific idle and engine. He knew from having built it, from having turned those rods on the south bend, in the hours before dawn on the last night of the old life. He'd know that engine anywhere and in any condition because it was his work, because his hands had made it. He slid out from under the bike and walked to the garage door. Ray Mercer pulled into the lot and stopped and sat for a moment looking at the sign above the door, then at the small chrome piece in the corner of the window. Then he swung off the bike and walked toward Everett with something different in how he moved. Not younger, he wasn't younger, and nothing was going to make him younger. But something had shifted in how he carried himself. The weight was still there. Grief doesn't leave. It redistributes, finds different places to live, changes its relationship to the person carrying it. But he was standing under it differently now, more upright, like a man who had remembered he was strong enough for this. She's still running right, Everett said. She's running perfect, Ray said. He put his hand on the tank with the same quiet, specific gesture he'd used with the leather bag 5 months ago. Had her serviced last month. Mechanic in Oakland said whoever did the connecting rod work was operating at a level he rarely saw. Tell him I said thanks. Ray laughed, the real kind coming from somewhere deep and unguarded. I did. He wasn't sure how to take it. They shook hands and then Ray pulled him into the same brief hard embrace as before, and Everett returned it without hesitation. Colt introduced himself with the directness of someone raised to look. People in the eye shook Ray's hand and then had the good sense to find work to do in the far bay. Everett put coffee on. Norma Pratt's Tuesday casserole was in the refrigerator. It was Friday, which meant it had been there since Tuesday, which meant it was exactly the right age for reheating. He warmed it without asking, and they ate at the workbench the way they'd eaten in August, standing up in the middle of everything the way men eat when they don't need ceremony to mark what matters. Sterling Calloway came by, Everett said. Ray nodded. He'd expected it. He was the one who'd suggested it. Your idea, Everett said. I told him the truth, Ray said, about what happened here, what his money had been part of. He looked at his coffee. I trusted him to decide what to do with it. Tommy taught me that not everything needs to be fixed with money or with tools. Sometimes you just tell the truth to the right person and let them figure out what it asks of them. Everett thought about that. Your president taught you to trust people. Ray considered this seriously. He taught me to tell the difference between the ones worth trusting and the ones who aren't. He paused. That's harder than either trusting everyone or trusting no one. They ate for a while in the comfortable silence of men who had earned the right to it. Then Ray set down his fork and looked at Everett with the expression of a man who has decided to say something he's been carrying for a while. I want to tell you something about that night, he said, about why I was on that road by myself. Everett waited. Every other member of the chapter rode up to Oakland 2 days before the memorial, together the way we always travel when we're going somewhere that matters. I was supposed to be with them. Ray looked at his coffee mug. I've been in a bad way since Tommy died. 30 years, him and me. He's the one who brought me in when I was young and angry and didn't have anything figured out. He stopped. When he died, it felt like losing the thing that told me which direction was up. Everett said nothing. He listened the way he'd learned to listen in this garage, fully without filling the space before it needed filling. I almost didn't come to the memorial, Ray said. I almost called Lucas and told him the bike had issues, that I'd watch the live stream, that I'd find some other way to be there. He paused, but then I thought about Tommy, about who would bring him if I didn't, and I got on the bike. The bike gave out, Everett said. The bike gave out. Ray nodded. I knew it was going bad earlier than I admitted to myself. I knew somewhere past Flagstaff, but I didn't stop because stopping meant sitting still with it, with him being gone and nothing to do except feel it. He looked at the workbench, and then the bike made the decision for me, and I coasted into your lot, and you were standing in the door, and you said, bring her inside, like it was just the next obvious thing to do, and that having somewhere to be, something specific to be doing, someone who was just matter of fact about the whole thing. He stopped. It helped more than I've been able to explain to anyone. Everett was quiet for a moment. You helped me too, he said. I want you to understand that. You drove into my lot at midnight with $43 in a dead engine, and you gave me something to do on the last night, something that mattered all the way through. He looked at the lathe in the corner, the workbench, the photograph of Harlan. That's what carried me through to morning. That's what made the difference between sitting in that chair and just sitting in that chair. The silence that followed was the kind that comes after two people have said true things and know that the space after them belongs to the truth and not to more words. We should have met 20 years ago, Ray said finally. We met when we were supposed to, Everett said. Ray looked at him. Then he laughed, not polite, not performed. The real thing from somewhere genuine and unguarded. Tommy used to say that, he said. Exactly that. Word for word. Smart man, Everett said. The smartest man I knew. A pause. The best. They sat with that for a while. The garage around them. The lathe and the workbench and the photograph and the mug and the tools that had been here through everything and were still here exactly where they belonged. Ray looked at the back corner. That light, he said. It's still going. Since '87, Everett said. My father was going to fix it. Never got around to it. I was going to fix it. Never got around to it either. You're not going to fix it, are you? Not quite a question. Everett looked at the light. Its patient, stubborn rhythm. On and off and on and off, the same as it had always been, the same as it was the night Ray had coasted in from the dark, the same as it had been every night before, that going back 40 years. No, Everett said. I don't think I am. Ray nodded slowly, like that made complete sense. Because it did. Before Ray left, he stood for a moment in the doorway, looking back into the garage. The way you look at something when you want to carry it with you properly. At the lathe and the workbench and the parts cabinet and the photograph and the mug and the sign above the door and the small chrome piece in the window corner and the light in the back that was still going, still blinking, patient and stubborn, and absolutely itself after all these years. He would have loved this place, Ray said. Briggs, he would have walked in here and felt at home from the first minute. Maybe that's why the bike broke down in my lot, Everett said. Ray looked at him. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, not quite grief. That thing in between, that feelings become when they've been through enough to stop being simple. Maybe it is, he said. He pulled Everett into the embrace one last time. Then he stepped back, swung onto the Harley, and kicked it over. The engine caught on the first attempt, clean and even and strong and exactly right. The sound of something made well by someone who understood what well-made meant and had taken the time and the care to achieve it. Ray rode out of the lot and onto the highway and headed west. And Everett stood in the garage door and watched until the sound was a sound in the distance, and then a suggestion of a sound, and then nothing at all, absorbed completely by the desert, the way the desert absorbs everything eventually. The January afternoon was doing what January afternoons do in the Mojave, burning low in gold and sideways across the land, making everything look older and more permanent than it was, throwing long shadows that stretched all the way to the horizon. Route 66 ran straight in both directions the way it had been running for 100 years, carrying people from wherever they were toward wherever they needed to be, without judgment, without preference. Just the road and the miles and the people moving through them. Colt came out of the far bay and stood beside Everett. A station wagon had pulled into the lot a few minutes ago, a couple somewhere in their 60s, engine running rough in a way that was obvious from where Everett was standing. Colt was looking at the car with the particular focused attention that Everett recognized, the attention of someone whose brain was already working the problem. Go ahead, Everett said. Show me what you've got. Colt crossed the lot and introduced himself to the couple and began asking them the right questions in the right order. His voice calm and professional and completely natural. The voice of someone who had found the work they were made for and was doing it without self-consciousness or performance. The same way Harlan had done it. The same way Everett had done it. The same thing passing forward. Harlan to Everett. Everett to Colt. The garage staying what it had always been through all the years and all the changes and all the attempts to make it into something else, staying itself, which was the only thing it had ever needed to do and the thing it had always done best. Everett pressed his palm flat against the doorframe. The same doorframe Harlan had stood in on the first day in the photograph on the wall inside 26 years old, with a wrench in his hand and 53 years of history still ahead of him. The wood under Everett's hand was the same wood, the same grain, the same weight, the same spot worn smooth by 53 years of hands resting exactly here. He stood there and breathed the cold desert air and listened to Colt's voice in the lot and watched Route 66 run straight and empty in both directions toward all the places it had always been running toward. In the back corner of the garage, the fluorescent light kept its patient rhythm, on and off and on and off, the same as it had been since 1987, the same as it had been on the night Ray Mercer had coasted in from the dark, the same as it would be tomorrow and the day after that. Unrepaired and unhurried and absolutely stubbornly, persistently itself. Some men are built to go, to cover ground, to move, to find out what's over the next rise and the rise after that, to be always somewhere new. And the world needs those men, and the roads need those men, and the stories they carry back are worth having. But some men are built to stay, to be the fixed point the road bends around, to be the place on the map that means something specific to someone who needed it and found it and never forgot where it was. To be the mechanic who answers the phone the same way for 50 years and means it every time. To be the man whose garage still has the same light in the corner that his father meant to fix and never got around to, because some things don't need fixing. They just need to still be there. Everett Cole was that man. He had always been that man. It just took one midnight, one dead engine, and $43 to make it visible to the world. He pushed off the door frame and went back inside. The work was waiting. The work was always waiting. That was the thing about work done right in a place built right by people who understood what they were building and why it mattered. It didn't stop. It just kept going. The way the light in the back corner kept going, patient and stubborn and unrepaired, blinking its slow rhythm in the corner of a garage on Route 66 in Kingman, Arizona, that was open for business and not going anywhere. Not this time.